and grind the grain on the farm, grind it up for animal consumption. But as we're going to show right here, you can also grind it up fine enough for human consumption. So we're going to start up our Farmall H. And the gentleman that's sitting on the H owns this particular tractor. There we go. That uses an electric start. Both of these tractors do, so it makes it a little more comfortable when it's going to start when you want it to. Again, this particular feed mill is from the 1930s, so it's really the same time period as the threshing machine and the reaper binder. It was produced by McCormick Gearing. Companies like International Harvester, that was McCormick Gearing, ended up producing a whole line of farm equipment in addition to tractors. So what we're going to start with is some of the wheat that we ground up yesterday. And there's actually, inside of here are two cylinders with hard edges on it that actually will break the teeth apart. And then down below here is where there are some metal burr plates that actually will grind the grain into a much finer cut. And we're going to do this in two different operations. And so we've got some that's sort of partially ground, and we're going to grind it a little bit finer and get it down a little bit more like flour. And all we're doing is pushing the burr stones a little closer together, so it basically grinds that. So now basically we have flour. And if you wanted to, this is what would be called graham flour. It hasn't been sifted at all, so it still has all of the bran, all of the wheat germ and such in it. Now one of the interesting things about this whole process is that in the early 1800s, they were particularly the large commercial mills, like some of those in Rochester, New York, and down around Philadelphia, we're actually sifting this so that it would really be a white flour. They'd try and get out all of the bran and all of the germ. Because if you're making fancy cakes and fancy bread and such, you want to have a really white flour so that you can introduce whatever flavors you want to it without having any of the flavors coming from the bran or the germ. It also allows things to rise better without some of the heavier material in it. And a gentleman by the name of Sylvester Graham got concerned that our diets weren't as healthy as they should be. And amongst other things, he advocated using the unbolted flour, and it's from his name that we get graham crackers. Because graham crackers basically historically use graham flour. If you look at graham crackers today, a lot of times graham flour is about the third or fourth ingredient. Sylvester Graham also believed in not drinking alcohol, tea, coffee, eating meat, and such. So he was really one of the forerunners of some of the early vegetarian health movements. And some folks later in the 1800s picked up some of those ideas, and particularly amongst the Seventh-day Adventists, and then several of them, one by the name of C.W. Post and another by the name of Kellogg, set up production of a breakfast food to get people away from eating a lot of fats and meat products and starches and such at breakfast and came up with grape nuts and Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And they also would probably not be real pleased to see things like Cocoa Puffs and a lot of the other stuff that we have today, in which the health, the nutritional product is about third or fourth down the line. Now the other thing, as I said, this particular type of feed mill was intended for feeding livestock, so a fairly common thing to do is to take something like your corn, and in this case, grind it up with the cob on it. But what we're going to do first, I think I'm going to do this first, is to grind some of it up just with the kernels to prove a point and what you can do with this, and we will just do a couple through there, because again, you can grind it up fine enough for human consumption even though that's not necessary to do it. That's probably good enough, just use that. By running this back through, you can see that we can get it ground up fine enough, actually a fairly fine cornmeal. We can sift this out, take out the coarse material, and have a corn flour like you'd make tortillas out of. But again, for animal consumption, you put the cob right through it completely. Again, you can grind it up as fine as is appropriate for the different species of animal that you happen to be feeding. So you can end up with something that's a little coarse, but still has a lot of the kernels. Well, they're not whole, but they're only basically split just a little bit in part. Or you can run it through another time. And put a little bit of pressure on the plates, and that will grind it down a little bit coarser. So it you'd end up with actually not quite as fine as your cornmeal, but a little bit finer feed for some of your animals. And if you want to compare the process of grinding with a tractor to grinding by hand, you can come up and use one of these little hand grinders here and see how much you can get done. Matter of fact, we should have somebody doing this at the same time when we're grinding here to compare the amount that we're done. It's not that you can't do it by hand, you can do it by hand, but the amount of time that it takes, in other words, in terms of the human productivity, is much greater when you apply a concentrated form of energy, such as gasoline, and complex technology to the process. Okay, now, the one last thing we're going to run through there, just for variation on things, is some of the grain that we just ground up, which is the spelts. Good. Use some of this. Not too much. Because the spelts, as I said, was primarily intended for animal consumption. So it would have a lot more of that roughage in it, which a certain amount of roughage is good for our digestive system, but not necessarily as much. So if you compare this, you can see the difference and sort of think about what that would be doing in your intestines and the like. Clean them out pretty well.